Welcome. This is Terry Deloria, Superintendent. I'm here to share with you the results of a very deep study of the Education Trust West. Our board and staff have a real commitment to making sure all of our students are successful after high school. And success means going on to either college or some other post-secondary training opportunities so they can be successful with careers throughout the rest of their lifetime. Ed Trust West is a nonprofit organization whose primary work is to advocate for equity and to close both equity or gaps in outcomes and opportunities. So Ed Trust West has a graphic that helps explain where they're trying to get our district to go. I know we've all talked about the differences between equality and equity. This first picture shows three people trying to watch a baseball game, and there's a fence in the way, and so the definition of equality would be to give each of them the same box to stand on so they can see the game. And while that works somewhat for two of them, the third little guy there still can't see the game. When we talk about equity, we give each of these the tools they need so they can see the game. And so the first gentleman doesn't need any box. He can already see over the fence. The second one needs one box, but the little guy needs two boxes, and now they can all see over the fence and they can see the game. But Ed Trust West wants us to think about liberation. And what that means is, how can you just take the fence away? How can you figure out what the barrier is and then remove it? And that's the work that's in front of us as we review those results today. Ed Trust West has a working definition of equity. It means recognizing the historical and systemic disparities in both opportunities and outcomes, and providing the resources necessary to address those disparities. And ultimately, as in the previous picture, dismantling the systemic barriers. So with Ed Trust West, it's not just opportunities. Certainly, we want to give students opportunities, but how successful are they in those opportunities? And this aligns perfectly with our district's vision statement, where we want all students to advance to and through post-secondary learning and careers. A high school diploma is just not sufficient for the vast majority of our students anymore. It requires college or some other kind of post-secondary training. So we want them to be successful when they pursue that. So in general, this page shows you how it is that the district is working with Ed Trust West. It's really divided up into three parts. The first part actually occurred last school year, where Ed Trust West and their staff conducted an educational equity audit. And what they did is they collected data from a number of sources, transcripts, other artifacts, such as master schedules or course descriptions, course syllabus, things of that nature. And they also gathered input from our district staff, also school staff, community members, and from the working committees. And I'll talk more about that shortly. The second part of their work is what we do in response to the findings from the audit. So the audit happened last year, and now we're in the process of reviewing those findings and making recommendations. So that's the blueprint action planning. Ultimately, we want to come up with a list of doable action steps that we can present to our board in March so that we can do the third portion of this plan, which is to incorporate those action steps into our district LCAP and allocate resources appropriately. So 3 steps. The first step, audit, was done last year. We're now engaged in the blueprint action planning, and in the spring we'll move to the LCAP. In big chunks, there was a transcript analysis that was done where the staff was looking for patterns and trends. What were they seeing? To what degree did all students have access and success in college prep courses? And we'll talk more about that in detail. Also, to what extent do students have access to supports and interventions? What kind of credit recovery programs do we have? What are the barriers that are preventing access to our A through G curriculum? How do we communicate progress to our students and their families? And we also engaged with various stakeholder groups. So we met with focus groups, we gave surveys, we interviewed individuals, and we had a large community meeting. So these are all the findings that I want to share with you. So first of all, what did EdTrust West learn from stakeholders? So here were the key takeaways from the surveys. From our students, we learned that 91% of them plan to attend college, and only about 49% felt well enough informed about the college requirements. In other words, what does it take to apply to college, and about the application process. 57% agreed that their teachers work hard to make sure all students are learning. So that's survey results from the students. From our parents, we learned that very similar to the student results, 92% of parents stated that their student is planning to attend college after graduation. 45% said that their school provides help to struggling students to help catch them up. And about 39% said they believe schools provide sufficient resources and support for English learners. The last group interviewed by the surveys was our staff, and this could be teachers, administrators, or counselors. 73% of staff agreed that schools offer a curriculum that prepares all students for college. 50% agreed schools encourage all students to take rigorous courses. And finally, a little more than a third believe schools systematically provide support to all struggling students. So these are the results from the survey. EdTrust also conducted focus groups of students at each of our schools. They had the same questions for each of the focus groups, but were able to sit back and listen to the responses of students to those questions. So here were the key findings. Students in general want more access to advanced placement courses, and they also want tutoring or support in those classes. Most of the students aspire to go to college. The students said that getting help really varies by the teacher. So some teachers give extra help, other teachers don't, the time of day, all those kinds of things, the extra help. Students also reported that they wanted more help with how to apply to college and how to apply for financial aid. What did the teachers share? So again, we had focus groups of teachers, and the findings were that students lack study skills, that there's no systemic tutoring help for students, that there's a need for more training when we work with our English learners and students with disabilities, and finally that sometimes the district professional development is not aligned with site needs. We also had focus groups of counselors, and their findings are as such, that first-generation college students need more support. That kind of makes sense. If their parents didn't go to college, they don't necessarily know how to support their children. There are attendance challenges. Sometimes students have a hard time getting to school because of transportation. There could be family responsibilities such as childcare or working. Counselors also said it's really important to build a college-going culture at their school, and that there were limited credit recovery opportunities for English learners. And then the final focus group were our parents. The parents reported that there's an inconsistent process for enrolling students in AP courses. Not just across schools, but even at the same school. You could have one AP teacher who has no requirements, just an interest in the AP course, and that was enough to get enrolled, to a teacher who had really rigid requirements in order to be in the AP class. Parents also said if you really want to offer true school choice, that transportation needs to be provided. The teachers or the parents appreciated teachers and staff who work hard to connect with students. And some of the parents reported challenges communicating with counselors. Now we'll switch gears to the community conversation. Last spring, We had a large group of people who came over to the District Galleria. It did include teachers and other staff from our schools, included students and parents, but it also included some of our community partners from our partnership school districts such as Jeff L., Bayshore, and Brisbane, Pacifica, also from our community college Skyline and from our County Office of Education. And we basically asked two questions, and the first one's presented here. What should districts and schools do to help each and every student be college and career ready? So this is what the district and the school should be doing. And they reported that we should focus on equity, make it our top priority, and more importantly, stick with it. Don't let it happen for a year, and when the next shiny penny comes along, switch gears to something else. Stick with equity. Provide more guidance for students if they're failing, and in particular, early on, making sure we know as early as possible so we can intervene before the problems become too big. Help change mindsets, not only among students and parents, but our staff. How can we make sure everyone has the mindset that every student should mean every student? That we should provide tutoring and other supports during the school day in all subject areas. In particular, I can remember comments that although there is some tutoring after school, but not all students have access to that because of different demands, school activities, jobs, family obligations. So if you really want to be equitable, provide that support during the school day. And to create systems that identify the struggling learners sooner. The second question was, what can the community do to support the district school to ensure each and every student is college and career ready? So here's what those participants came up with. First, to have industry volunteers serving as mentors to students. And to start providing visits to colleges and industry and provide transportation to do that. To arrange for local colleges to offer on-site after-school tutoring and academic supports. To create partnerships with mental health nonprofits so that we can better meet the social emotional needs of our students. And finally, to develop a program of internships throughout the school year and during summer break so students can learn more about potential careers. There was also a transcript analysis done, so everything I talked about so far has been either through a survey, an online survey, or through meeting with focus groups. In this data collection, the researchers had copies of the final transcripts for seniors for the class of 2017. So that class had 1,105 students from all 5 of our schools. And the first two really big findings were this, that fewer than 43% of students enrolled in a full A through G course sequence. What that means is if you looked at the transcript, you could see that the student, for example, had enrolled in all 4 years of A through G English, had enrolled in all 3 A through G approved history or social studies, etc. They actually enrolled in all the courses required. The second finding, fewer than 32% completed the A through G course sequence. So what that means is when they were enrolled, they had to get a C or better for it to count as completion because the College Board or the UC regions don't accept a grade lower than a C minus. So you have to have a C minus grade or better. So again, look at the two things we're talking about. We're talking about, was a student enrolled, and if they were enrolled, did they complete that enrollment with the required C minus grade or better? So this graph shows completion rates in A through G classes by school. And to kind of get you acclimated, the blue bars represent the students who are enrolled in all of the A through G classes over their 4 years in high school. And the orange bar shows you of those students, how many, or of the students at that school, what percent had the required C minus or better grade in all of those courses. So for example, when you look at Jefferson, for the class of 2017, 42% of those students had enrolled in all of the courses in the A through G sequence. but 32% actually earned the required C- grade or better. And you can see for the other schools, Oceana, Terra Nova, Westmore. Just a note about Thornton, students generally don't go to Thornton until they're in their junior year. And they're working oftentimes on earning credits for graduation. Nevertheless, we want to be thinking about how will we get Thornton students equally prepared so they're successful in college and career. This graph shows you the, again, enrollment and completion rates of A through G course sequences, but by ethnicity. So for example, you can see that for the Latino subgroup, 27% of them had enrolled in all of the A through G courses required, and 17% earned the C- grade or better to count for A through G credits. So you can see we've got some not only gaps between enrollment and completion, but we have gaps between the subgroups. You'll also see the size of each of those subgroups. Again, enrollment versus completion rate. This graph looks at ethnicity again, but now adds gender into it. And this graph is limited to enrollment. So which students were enrolled in the A through G sequences by ethnicity and then separated by gender. So on the right, you see the females, and you can see in general the females were enrolled in A through G courses at a higher rate than the males. In some cases, you have some pretty big gaps. If you look at the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander subgroup, 40% of the females were enrolled in A through G courses, whereas only 10% of the males. Again, this is the senior class of 2017. Similar graph, looking at ethnicity and gender, but this time students who completed the sequence with the required C- grades or better. Gaps are a little more alarming here. You can see we have two subgroups where no male completed the sequence with the required C- grade or better, that being the Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian subgroup, and our Black or African American subgroup. So these are some of the questions we need to address. Why is this happening? And what are we going to do about it? Again, back to the enrollment and completion rates, this time for students by income status. So in our district, we measure that by participation in either the free or reduced meals program. The left two bars show you students who participate in free or reduced meals, 35% of them, again, seniors, class of 2017, enrolled in the full A through G course sequence, whereas only 26% of them, a little more than a fourth, got the required C- grade or better. The right two bars show students who are not low income, just a little over half enrolled in A through G courses, with 38% getting the required C- grade or better. Here's the same data, this time disaggregated by their language proficiency status. So when students come to our schools and their first language is something other than English, we designate them as English learners until they complete the requirements to be reclassified. So if you look at our English learner group, none of them, and again, the senior class of 2017, none of our English learners have been enrolled in the complete course sequence of A through G classes. And therefore, none of them were able to get the required grades. A bright spot in this data is that if you look at our reclassified fluent English proficient students, again, those were the English learners who met our requirements and we were able to reclassify them as fluent, they performed on par with their English only peers, with 46% of them enrolling in the complete sequence of A through G classes, and 32% of them, the reclassified, getting the required C- grade or better. Very similar to the English only. We also looked at the data by special education status. This is whether a student had an IEP or not. And And you can see of those seniors, 111 had IEPs. Just 3% of them were enrolled in the complete sequence of A through G classes, and 2% had the required C- grade or better. This is troubling because the vast majority of our students with disabilities, easily 85% of them, are on a high school diploma path and will need to go on to some kind of post-secondary training. And so it's troubling that so few of them were actually enrolled in those courses. And of course, the bars for students without IEPs at 48% enrolled and 36% completion. Researchers also disaggregated that senior class data by subject area. So you can see on the left, in history, social science, students of that class, 85% of them were enrolled in the A through G sequence, with 67% of them getting the required C- grade or better. You would expect this data to be high because the classes that you have to take for A through G in history are also the ones required for high school graduation. So, one question would be to ask, what were the other 15% taking? What happened there? You can also take a look at English. Now, our students have to take 4 years of English to graduate, and our English 9, 10, 11, and 12 courses are all A through G approved. So the question that the working groups will be asking is, what are the other classes students are taking if they're not in A through G classes? Part of that answer is we do have English learners who take ELD, and only one of those courses, according to the UC Regents, can count through A through G for A through G credit. So we need to take a look at what are students taking instead of the A through G English. And consequently, what's going on in some of the other content areas that so few students are enrolled in the full sequence of A through G classes. Researchers also did an on-off track analysis. And what they did is they made a definition by grade level of who was on track for A through G and who was not. And again, this is taking a look at that same senior class of 2017. So if you look at the bar for grade 9, 55% of the students were on track. That meant that they completed a year of English and Algebra 1 or Math Course 1. Then when you went on to the 10th grade class, that percentage dropped to 41%, and you can see what the requirements were for that. In the junior year, it dropped to 40%, and by the senior year, completing A through G had dropped to 32%. The next part of the webinar will share with you WestEd's findings and recommendations based on all of this data, and it covers 9 different areas: curriculum and instruction, what are the students learning, what's the school climate and culture like, what opportunities are there for professional learning, what kind of student supports and interventions are in place, how are we responding to students with disabilities and English learners, what are we doing in alternative education, how are we helping students access college and career success, how are we engaging families and the community, and finally, how are we allocating our resources. So in the findings category, there are disparities in access to A through G classes and in completion across ethnic and gender groups. The recommendation is that we should make the A through G course sequence the default curriculum with progress monitoring and support. So what that means is that we would automatically enroll all of our students in A through G courses. And the way a student is opted out of an A through G course is by the parent coming in and working with a counselor, getting consultation on why A through G is necessary. Second finding is that our career technical education courses are not all A through G approved. We have made some progress in this area. The recommendation is to make sure that they're all A through G approved. and to complete the pathways. One of the ways that the state of California measures college and career readiness, besides A through G completion rate, is whether students completed a career technical education pathway. The third finding is that there were insufficient academic supports during the school day. Again, during the school day, because if we put them after school, not all students have access. They have other things that they do after school that would take them away from those opportunities. So we should implement systems to identify needs and trigger interventions. Another finding was that we need to make instructional shifts to the new standards and for meeting the needs of diverse learners. And the recommendation is to make sure teachers understand how to collaborate and to give them more opportunities to collaboration and to provide professional learning focused on teaching and learning. There is a finding that staffing formulas not all align to student needs, so allocate resources equitably according to the need. So the next step in the process was that middle column that I showed on one of the first slides, is to develop an action plan. So we have working groups who will be reviewing the data. They will be working with EdTrust staff to understand where the problems are, to develop solutions, to get feedback from the working committee and steering committee, and then finally to integrate that feedback into the current initiatives and the LCAP process. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you again for participating in this broadcast of the EdTrust West finding, and you'll be hearing more about this work as we go through the school year. Thanks again.